Welcome back to the second session of my tutorial, Creating Your Own Fish Replica. I'm Mr. R, and this is the Rondinelli Project. Hey, I got a disclaimer that I have to make. I am a very small channel. I am not monetized, nor am I endorsed by any of the products you may see in any of my videos. This is just the items I've chose to use. Today's video will teach you step 5, how to create the mold for your fish replica. I will also show you the items you're going to need to complete this step. And this is a really detailed tutorial. And I want to be very clear. I highly recommend you wait until you have watched this entire tutorial start to finish, not just today's video, but all the future ones as well, before you embark on this hobby. If you decide to take on this craft, there are many items you are going to have to purchase before you begin. Only by being patient and waiting until you have seen everything you need to see will you understand all the steps involved to create a fish replica. So I went to Lake Wilhelm and I started there catching a black crappie to show you how to create a fish replica. So let's start there. Hello everybody, I'm Mr. R. I'm on Lake Wilhelm. It's a beautiful morning. I'm over here to catch a black crappie so that we can finish our tutorial on fish replicas. Remember, when you get the fish you want to replicate, you want to take really good care of it, put it in a live well, pay attention that you don't damage the fins or tear the fins at all. So as soon as we catch one here, we'll inspect that and we'll put it in a live well. Well, the water temperature now is 78 degrees. It's going to be hot for the next few days. They're starting to hit a little bit. They're not real big, but we're getting something that we need for our tutorial. And I am right now catching them anywhere between 10 to 14 feet of water. So they've kind of fanned out. They are now starting to disperse into deeper water. You can still catch them near the shore, but it's not like the spawn. You have to hunt for them now. Few and far between. Getting a hit. Okay, let's see if we can get this guy. And it's at the hook. Doesn't feel very big, but I'm sure it's crappie. Here's an example of a black crappie. It's not a big one. This would be a good one to use for a fish replica reproduction if you're just starting out. So this will give you kind of an idea of what I mean by a crappie. It's 7-8 inches long. So we'll put him in the live well. Now you want to take good care of the fins. See, these are really nice fins. Nice dorsal fin, nice caudal fin, nice anal fin, good pectoral fins and ventral fins. This is a nice one. So you want to take pictures of this right away so that you have the colors correct. If you're just starting out, you're going to need to take lots of photos for your reference. This is high fiber. It's kind of like flour, and it's used to create bedding to support your fish that you are going to mold. You add water to this in any consistency. You can make it thin, you can make it thick, and it lasts forever. I mean, if it dries out, you grind it up and you can reuse it. So it's really one of the best things I've found to put your fish in to support it. And this is really important. This is really important because this is what you have to visualize before you even begin, the position you want your fish to be in. You want to keep the lid on this, keep it covered when you're not using it so it doesn't dry out. This is my molding board, And I use a thin piece of plastic that I've screwed down, and you can see I've put an arc on this, and this is what I use to create the bend in the fish. It gives it a more natural look. Okay, and what I'm doing now is I'm taking my high fiber, and I'm going to take a putty knife, and I'm going to apply the high fiber to my mold board, and I use this mold board for small fish, and I'm creating a bed for the fish to be put in, and that's what I'm going to do right here. You want to put it on thick, and then you smooth it out, and you can use water. You can thin this down, use water. It makes a real smooth surface. I'm going to speed this up a little bit just so it doesn't take so much time, but the whole purpose of this is to create a bed big enough to support the fish and enough space around the fish that you can put your markers for the mold. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but the smoother your mold base becomes in the bedding, the better your mold will appear once it's finished. And it sometimes makes it a lot easier to separate the A and B parts of the mold. Right now, what you are doing is you're creating the A side of the mold. We're going to mold one side of the Crappie. What I'm going to do now is set this aside and prepare the fish to put into the bedding. What I'm doing here is bringing out a pan to put the fish in. I wrap the fish, like I told you in the first session of the tutorial, with paper towel, put it in a plastic bag, popped it in the fridge. What I'm doing now is unwrapping it, going to take the fish out, going to put it in the pan. And the reason I want to put it in the pan is I'm going to add some water. And I'm going to examine, make sure that everything looks good before you begin putting the fish into the bedding. So, unwrap the fish, put it in the pan. I'll add a little bit of water now. That just keeps the fins from drying out. That's really important because they become brittle and you don't want to crack them. I'm looking right now to see which side of the fish looks the best. I don't need to worry about that right now, but eventually when you get to the painting and the side you want to display, that's important. Now, there are the ventral fins, or what are known as the pelvic fins. You have the anal fin, the caudal fin is the tail, the dorsal fin on the top, with the spines and the soft tissue. There's the operculum, it's the gill opening, there's the gills. Now, here's the thing about this. You keep the tail, you keep the anal fin and the dorsal fin attached to the fish, but you cannot create a mold with the pectoral fins and the pelvic fins attached. So you have to remove them. And you have to make a separate mold of the fins to reproduce those to attach to the fish later. We'll get to all of that, but that's way ahead in the tutorial. So before I can put this in the bedding, I'm going to remove those 4 fins, and I have containers for those fins. I look from the back of the fish, and I keep my left and right straight, almost like you're the fish. So I have a container for the left pectoral fin and the right pectoral fin. When I remove them, I put them in those containers. I also have a left and right pelvic fin, the rear ones. And that way I keep them organized so I don't mix them up. And then once you do that, you put it back in the fridge and keep it till you're ready to create a mold for those fins. I know this sounds like a lot, but once you do this a couple times, it's not really that bad, but there are a lot of steps involved. What I'm going to do now is add some water to my containers for the 4 fins I'm about to remove from the fish, the pectoral fins and the pelvic fins. I'm going to remove the pectoral fins first. I have a pair of forceps and a pair of little scissors, and I'm going to cut them off real close to the body. And that way it keeps the fin intact. And then I'm going to put that in a container so that I don't get it mixed up, because I need to know that that's the left pectoral fin. I'll do the same thing on the right side because I need to know it's the right pectoral fin. I'm going to cut right as tight to the body as I can. And then that'll go in the right pectoral container. We'll have to mold those fins at a later step. Now I'm going to remove the pelvic fins or ventral fins. I'm going to remove the left pelvic fin. You want to keep the left and the right straight in your head. That's why I have the container. So once I remove that, I'm going to put that in the container of water for later use. Once you've removed all 4 fins, you want to make sure they're in the right containers. You want to cut those fins as close to the body as possible. Now you can see I have all 4 fins removed from the left side and the right side, and you're going to take those containers that I got here and you're going to remove them and put them back in the refrigerator to keep them for later use. Now your black crappie is ready to be put onto the bedding and positioned. Okay, we're going to mold our fish. So you take your crappie, you lay it on your bedding, and you push down to the halfway point of the fish, all the way around. Now, you don't want to rush this. This takes time. It's a little tedious, but if you take your time and get it right, you'll have a good mold. If you get it wrong, you'll have a bad mold, and you're just wasting your time. So this is critical to get this right. This is the position that you determine. You can position a fish any way you want. That's up to you, the creator. Some positions get really, really hard to do, but what I'm doing is the high fiber is holding the fins in place, and the fish side that you see is the actual side we're going to create the mold on, not what's in the bedding. The bedding is just supporting the fish. I'm going to open the mouth, because if I don't fill that with high fiber, when I pour the resin over top of this to create the A side of the mold, fiberglass will flow down inside of the mouth and it will ruin the mold. Everywhere you see high fiber, the fiberglass resin can't penetrate. That's why I call this the A mold. Eventually we'll do the B mold, but right now we're doing the A side of the fish. I'm going to speed this up now, just so that you don't have to sit and watch as long. But I don't like to speed things up too much, because people that want to learn how to do this, you can't tell what I'm doing if I speed it up too much. It's one thing I don't like when people speed things up on tutorials. But once I feel you have the idea what I'm doing, then I'll speed it up just to save time. And all I'm doing here is making sure that the high fiber is all the way around equally on the fish to the halfway point of the A side, making sure that I have the fins, the dorsal fin, the tail, the anal fin, all in the position that I want, and the mouth, so that I'm going to do an open mouth reproduction here, replica. So I want to make sure that I have that all filled in, but what I'm doing right now is making sure that I have enough space all the way around the fish in order to create the mold, and I'll put my markers in here in a little bit. What I'm going to do now is take a paintbrush, fairly soft bristles, and water and a spray bottle, and I'll mist the fish, dip the paintbrush in water, and I'm going to clean as much of the high fiber off the fish as I possibly can. You want to try to get all of it off. You want to have a really, really clean side of the fish before we do our actual pour. So that's what I'm doing. Making sure that the fins stay in place, because sometimes the high fiber gets on there and the fins lift up a little bit. You don't want to have a situation where the fiberglass flows underneath. That's an undercut, and it's not what you want. So it just takes time. You don't want to rush this. But I'll speed this up here, and all I'm doing is taking water and I'm brushing with the scales. I'm not brushing against the scales. And I'm getting all of that high fiber out of the nooks and crannies of the fish on the mold side, the A side. And I want to make sure that I'm get around the lips of the fish on the mouth. Okay, I'm going to teach you something here. I don't like the position of this dorsal fin, so it's okay. I'm going to lift it up out of the bedding and reposition it so that it looks better, looks more natural when they flare their fins up on top. They raise that dorsal fin. It takes a little bit of repositioning occasionally, and it's okay. Sometimes those spines that have the sharp points on it will lift up, and you want to keep those right down in the bedding. You may use a spray bottle. That's okay. Add lots of water. It keeps everything cleared off, keeps things smooth, gets the high fiber off of the fish's skin. And you want to get all that off eventually. Now I'm going to continue to speed this up because all I'm doing is cleaning, and I'll slow it down again when the cleaning is completely done so that you can see the end result. Okay, what I'm going to do now, I slow this back down because we're going to flare the gill. You know, fish don't just have their gills closed all the time. The operculum is constantly opening and closing, and they bring water in through their mouth and over through their gills, and that's how they breathe underwater. So I'm going to flare the gill, and eventually we're going to put the gill back in. We're going to reproduce it, you know, a replica of it, but I'm going to show you how you flare the gill. You take high fiber, and I take my forceps and I open up the gill cover, the operculum, and I'm going to put in high fiber to hold that open. And the reason I'm doing that is I don't want fiberglass resin to get down in there. So that keeps the fiberglass resin out. You have to kind of think backwards a little bit. Where you don't want resin to go, you have to fill it with high fiber. And then eventually I'll grind that away, and you'll see that in a later step. But that's why I'm doing this. And so it's important that you get that filled, that cavity filled up. But you also then have to clean it off the scales. And that I'll demonstrate here in just a moment as well. But that's what I'm doing right now, is I'm filling that opening with high fiber, and then I'll smooth that all out. And then eventually I'll be able to grind that away. And the end result is replacing a replica of the gill to put in that opening. Okay, we're going to speed things back up. I'm going to take a magic marker to make my key marks. They're just little indentations so that the molds have a place to fit together. As I move towards the mouth, I start to notice I don't have enough room up there. So what I'm going to do is take some more high fiber and put it around in front of the mouth to make more bedding. That way I have enough room to put a marker right in that area I just showed you right there. So we'll drag out some high fiber and we will put it in front of the mouth to create additional space to add our mold markers. And what I'll do then after I add more high fiber and put more bedding down is I'll just clean up the surface of the mold itself on the high fiber. So it's time to speed things up again. I am now going to take a hairdryer and dry off the fish. The purpose for that is as it dries the skin a little bit in the fins, they'll pull a little bit tighter. It'll create more definition in the scales so that when we pour our fiberglass resin, we get good detail in our mold. It's probably worth noting you don't want to overdo the hairdryer. You can actually cook the fish this way. You don't want to do that. You just want to dry it off enough to raise the scales just a little bit. Your best judgment is your own observation, but don't overdo it. This is polyvinyl alcohol, and its purpose is to release the fiberglass from another piece of fiberglass or the fiberglass from the fish. So before we pour our fiberglass resin over this to mold side A, we're going to coat the entire fish with PVA. And its purpose here is twofold. It's to help raise the scales as well as make it easier to separate or release the resin from the surface of the fish. Now I want to make sure that I coat everything evenly. I don't want to use too much, but a light coat, and it helps clean everything off the fish as well. And once that's done, you're ready to mix up a batch of resin and cover the fish for the mold. Okay, it's time for mixing your fiberglass resin, and here's the things you're going to need. A scale that can measure to the nearest tenth of an ounce. You're going to need fiberglass resin. You can get this just about anywhere. This is methyl ethyl ketone peroxide, better known as MEKP. It sets the resin, and it comes with the fiberglass resin. This is your thickener for the fiberglass resin. It comes in a paste form. This is the hardener for the thickener for the resin. The hardener also comes with the Bondo body filler. These are popsicle sticks, and they're used for mixing. These are rubber gloves, and you should always protect your hands. These are chip brushes to apply the resin because it's really sticky. I can't stress this enough, but you absolutely need a respirator when working with these chemicals. These are 4-ounce paper cups. I buy them in bulk because you go through a lot of them and throw them away when you're done. Okay, make sure you put on your rubber gloves to protect your hands and keep that fiberglass resin and filler off of them. Once you have your gloves on, make sure that you put your respirator on to protect your lungs. To start, I'm going to zero out my scale. I'm going to turn it on, put the cup on, and make sure that we zero that out. I'm going to do a 50-50 mix. So for this size fish, you need anywhere from 3 to 4 ounces. We'll start with 4. It's probably too much, but I'm going to put in 2 ounces of the resin. And there's my 2 ounces. Since this is a 50-50 mix, I'm going to add 2 ounces of the thickener, the body filler. Now these chemicals have terrible, terrible fumes, so you want to make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area. Do not do this in the basement of your house. It'll permeate throughout the house, and make sure you have that respirator on. Now, what I'm going to do is mix up my Bondo, and I use a paint stirring stick to do that. And I'm going to transfer the Bondo into the resin. Now this is a 50-50 mix, so I want to put in 2 ounces so that I bring our total up to 4 ounces. I'm going to speed this up. There's your 4 ounces. Okay, how much you mix is kind of a guess, but I probably mixed a little too much. I'm right at the top of my paper cup. I have to mix this together, get the Bondo and the fiberglass into a nice consistency. Now I'm going to add my MEKP, the hardener for the fiberglass resin. The rule of thumb is 1 drop for every 1/10 of an ounce. So every ounce is 10 drops. I added 2 ounces, that's 20 drops. This is the hardener for the body filler. And I added 2 ounces of body filler, so I put 2 pea-size amounts on a popsicle stick and then mix it thoroughly. You have to mix it very well. My recommendation is to mix it for about 2 minutes. Make sure you get it on the sides too. Make sure you mix it all the way thoroughly on the bottom, on the sides. Once you add the hardener, the chemical reaction is going to begin. The set time is going to depend on the outside temperature. The colder it is, the longer it takes to set. The warmer it is, the quicker it will set. It was about 90 degrees. It was hot the day I did this, so it will set up fairly quickly. You have some working time, but you don't have till Christmas, so you want to get this poured over your fish. Now, I mixed more than I really needed. It's better to have too much than not enough, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour this over the fish, covering it completely and also covering the key markers, the little indentations I put in the bedding. The idea here is to completely cover the fish and your bedding, and this will create the A side of the mold. Now I'm going to make sure everything is covered if it's a little thin, and I'm going to set this aside until this sets up, and it's starting to set up, so I didn't leave myself a lot of time. Now while that's setting up, I'm going to mix another small batch, 2 ounces of just resin, no body filler, no thickener. Now I'm going to add my hardening drops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's my 20 drops of MEKP. Now I'm going to mix it really well to get the catalyst started so that it can harden. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to add fiberglass matting to the cured first coat of fiberglass resin over the fish. Okay, I bring my fish back in and the coating of resin has hardened, and this is where you use the chip brush to add a coat of resin on top of your A-side mold. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm laying a foundation to put the fiberglass matting on that I'm going to add here in just a second. And the resin will melt that fiberglass, and it's going to make a really, really, really hard surface for our A side of our mold. Just make sure you cover the entire mold with a heavy coat. Now we add our fiberglass matting, and it kind of comes apart like a little shards. You put it on, you dab fiberglass resin on it, and it melts. And what you're doing is you're building up a layer of this fiberglass matting, which will make this really, really hard shell once it sets up. And it takes about a half an hour to an hour to set. And you just keep adding fiberglass matting where you think you need it. You don't want to put too much on, but you want to put enough so that you harden your mold. And I'll speed this up here so you see the process. And now what I'm going to do is add some acetone to a cup and clean my brush. Some people just throw the brushes away. I clean them, and you can use them over and over again. After a while, you have to throw them away, but this works pretty well. Get all the fiberglass out of there, rinse it off in the acetone, and then dry your brush out, set it aside to dry. And it evaporates very, very quickly. The A side of our mold has completely set, and what I'm going to do now is turn it over and remove all of the high fiber bedding and clean the fish up to prepare it for the side B mold. Once you flip it over, you want to carefully remove the bedding material, the high fiber, put it back in the tub, but you want to be really careful around the fins, but you want to remove all of that. And then we're going to do a little rinse with water to get it really super clean. You lose a little bit of high fiber here, but that's okay. I'm going to move this to where I work indoors, and I'm going to just carefully clean the fish and get rid of all the high fiber that's left, and then I will trim the mold. I'll speed this up a little bit. But you want to be very careful not to displace the fins or the fish. Now you can see that the fish is all cleaned off and the A side of the mold is ready to be trimmed. I just use a pair of tin snips and I go around the outer markers, the key markers that I put on the mold, and go all the way around and neaten up the edges. You want to be careful that you don't crack the mold as you work around the outside edge. And once I finish the rough trim, I'll take a pair of scissors and snip off the pieces of fiberglass. And there you have it. That's the A side mold is done. Okay, preparing the B side of the mold. It's just like the A side, only without using any bedding. We're just going to use resin and fiberglass, our body filler, our Bondo, our 50-50 mix, and we're going to cover this side of the fish, but we got to get it ready. So I'm going to dry it off with the hair dryer, and then I'm going to flare that gill just like I did on the other side of the fish. Remember, don't over dry the fish, just tighten it up a little. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my forceps and I'm going to lift up the operculum and put in my high fiber. It's the only place we're going to use high fiber on this side of the fish, but it holds that gill opening, the operculum, so that we can later get rid of that area to add the gills. Since you've seen me do this before, I'll speed this up just to save some time and make sure the fish is all clean, ready to be covered in fiberglass resin. Now that the fish is all clean and the operculum is ready, I'm going to take my PVA and I'm going to coat the fish and the entire side of this mold so that the side B doesn't stick to side A. You've seen me do this before, so I'll speed this up. Now you want to make sure that you completely cover the fish with PVA, but also don't forget you have to cover the entire mold, the side A, with all of the key markers. Then you take your hair dryer and tighten up the skin and let the PVA thoroughly dry before adding resin. So I'm going to mix the resin again, but this time I'm only going to do 3 ounces, not 4 ounces. I really didn't need 4 ounces, so I'm going to make an adjustment. You've seen me do this, but I'll speed it up. Remember, I'm going to add the resin and I'm going to add the body filler 50-50 mix, and then add the catalyst to let it cure and harden. And there's my 3 ounces. I will thoroughly mix this up to mix the Bondo and the fiberglass resin together and then add my catalyst. I'm going to add the methyl ethyl ketone peroxide. In this case, I'm going to put in 15 drops, 1.5 ounces, hence 15 drops. And I'm also going to add the hardener for the body filler. It's more like a toothpaste, 2 little pea-sized toothpaste amounts, and mix that very well. It's so hot that this is a little runny. There's the 1, there's the 2, and then mix that up thoroughly. You want to make sure you get all of your hardeners off the side, get it mixed really well, and now you're ready for your pour right over the side A mold, just like I did on the high fiber, but now you're doing mold to mold, and now you'll see the reason for those key markers. You want to cover this mold completely, cover the fish and cover the side A mold, including the markers. And once that's done, you want to take your mold and set it aside and let this coat on the side B completely set. Here it's completely set, and it's now ready for fiberglass resin and mat to strengthen the mold. Just like before, I'm going to add fiberglass resin, put on a heavy coat, and then add the matting and let it melt. And you've seen me do this before, so I'll speed this up. Take your fiberglass matting, lay it down on top of your mold. Take some resin, soak it up, let it melt, add it where you need it, give it strength. And then once you're completely done with that, set it aside and let it set up. It'll take about a half an hour to an hour. Now once this is all set, I'm going to take a small screwdriver and a little hammer that I use to start separating the two halves, the A and B halves. You want to be careful when you do this, just that you don't break the mold. But you just work around the edges and you keep prying and prying, and pretty soon it'll let go. The PVA will do its job and the mold release will release, and at that point you're going to remove the fish and clean up the mold. But remember, you have to go all the way around the part A and part B mold to get it to release. There's a little piece here holding things up, so I took my tin snips and I trimmed that a little bit. You're finding the seam between the two halves and you're just working all the way around. Just take your time, don't rush this part. You can see right here, it pops open. Right there, it popped open, and then it releases, and you can separate the two. And there you have an A side and a B side. What I'm doing here is inspecting the mold, just making sure everything was okay. There's some minor imperfections that can be fixed. That'll be in another tutorial. But what I need to do now is remove the fish, and that'll pull right out. Just take a screwdriver, stick in the mouth, and pull it out. And there's the importance of this. So once we've made the mold, then we've got this mold, and only one fish gave its life for the mold. So if I want to do another crappie in this position, this size, I don't have to go get another fish. I can just reuse this mold. Okay, what I do here is use a little Dawn dish detergent, put in the mold, take a toothbrush, and I scrub the inside of the molds and the back side of the molds, both A and B sides, until they're clean. Get out any imperfections, any little pieces of fish. Sometimes the tail and the fins leave some discoloration. You want to get that all out of there. Clean the markers real well, and then set the mold aside to dry. It's waterproof, it's fiberglass, and it's got a lot of strength. And that's how you clean the mold. And there's the A side and the B side. You can see your markers, and that's how the mold goes together. And now you take it apart. And it's a whole nother process of recreating the replica, but you have to have the mold first, and that's how it's done. As you can see, this is more than meets the eye when it comes to creating a fish replica. This concludes session 2. In the next tutorial, I will teach you how to cast the fish replica from the mold. Session 3 is titled Casting the Replica. I will get that posted as soon as I can. I'm Mr. R, and this is the Rondinelli Project. And we gone!